Welcome to the Rubin Museum Online and this special Brainwave session in our annual series in which we explore the workings of our mind through Western contemporary psychology and neuroscience in the context of Buddhist philosophy and practice. I'm Tim McHenry. For those of you in the vicinity of New York, yes, the museum is open, but just the galleries and shop at this point, but we're happy to bring our programming to you online. Our theme this year is awareness, inspired by our current exhibition, Awaken, which is a visual guide to enlightenment using the construct of a mandala. Now, the very first step on this path to enlightenment is awareness, and especially self-awareness. When we talk about a blind spot, we usually mean that something that is there and often totally visible to others, but just not yourself. Our emotional truths are often hidden from us by wishful thinking, ambition, or trauma. And self-awareness is about removing the things that obscure our appreciation of ourselves in relation to others and the whole. And tonight, we're addressing a very pressing need for self-awareness that can help identify the potential for intimate partner violence before it is too late. Tanya Selvaratnam, drawing from her intimate experience with former New York State Attorney General Eric Schneiderman, discusses her growing self-awareness that has been growing as she's been writing and then rewriting her book, Assume Nothing. Her objective in writing the book is to expose the prevalence of intimate partner violence and offer steps to spot, stop, and prevent it. What makes this conversation highly unusual is that her conversation partner, Dr. Mark Epstein, is the psychiatrist who's been treating her over these past years. So tonight, you get to see inside a professional, but usually sequestered relationship that we are not normally privy to. And while the Emmy-nominated producer Tanya Selvaratnam has been a visitor to the Reuben galleries and theatre over the years, Dr. Mark Epstein is happily a frequent visitor to the Reuben stage. And his many important books exploring the interface of Buddhism and psychotherapy, such as the most recent Advice Not Given, A Guide to Getting Over Yourself, are well represented on the shelves of our museum shop, which is open Thursday through Sunday, every week, by the way. So in this session, we're going to invite Tanya and Mark to have a conversation in public for the first time for about 40 minutes and share their thoughts and discoveries in this process. And then invite you to submit your questions. Hopefully that can be answered within the 20-minute segment at the very end. And we will conclude with a meditation. And just advice for the Q&A, if you have questions, just put them in the Q&A tab at the bottom right-hand corner of your Zoom screen. That's the way we'd like to communicate tonight. Thank you so much. And please join us in welcoming Dr. Mark Epstein and Tanya Selvaratnam to this very special conversation.
Thank you, Tim.
Thank you, Tim. Hi, Tanya.
Hi, Mark.
Hey. and hello to everybody out there. Thank you for joining us. I think as Tim said, it's going to be a special conversation. One of the first of this kind, certainly between myself and Tanya. I had the privilege, I would say, of being Tanya's therapist off and on, every few weeks over the past few years, as a witness first to Tanya's burgeoning relationship with what she thought was a true love relationship with Eric Schneiderman. And then gradually, like I would say the unfolding of a horror story or something, but gradually Tanya felt comfortable enough to let me know what was going on in the intimate details of the relationship. And I was witness then to her attempt and her ability to extract herself from the relationship, and then the writing of this incredible book, which I haven't had enough time to compliment you on, Tanya, but you really did something great. So I'm excited about having this chance to talk with you publicly.
I'm excited too. And I feel like people are getting a window into our kind of private relationship as patient and therapist, which is
Yeah.
very special, daunting, and I'm curious to see where it goes.
Well, um, just to parenthetically, I managed to be friends with both of my therapists, who always said to me as we were in the process of figuring that out, when you're in the office with me, I'll be your therapist, but if I see you outside of the office, I'm just myself. So I think it's in that spirit that that I want to, not negating our history, but also just, being in this role. So um, I don't know if everybody listening knows your background, Tanya, but I think before we get into the relationship, it might be helpful for people who don't know to hear just, something of your biography, so that they can understand your, your intelligence and your accomplishments and so on. So would you mind, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but would you mind filling people in a
Of
little bit
course.
about who you are?
I am an artist, writer, and producer. Was born in Sri Lanka, grew up in Long Beach, California, and I split my time between Portland, Oregon, and New York City, and both feature as kind of characters in the book. Mark, you also feature as a character in the book.
I went straight for that.
And right now, I am the senior advisor on gender justice narratives for the Pop Culture Collaborative, and have produced many, many movies and shows, and written, this is now my second book, and have written many essays. So I'm grateful to be an artist, and that when life throws you lemons, I say make art, and that's what I did here.
Yeah, that's certainly true. So Eric Schneiderman, will you tell us a little bit about meeting him and what was appealing about him and the early part of the relationship?
I met him in 2016 at the Democratic National Convention in Philadelphia. And when we first encountered each other, it felt too good to be true. He was kind, he was curious, he was very complimentary about me, about my work. And I was intrigued that he was paying so much attention to me. He also studied Chinese, as I did. And I
Yeah.
believe you did too, Mark, right?
I did not, no.
You did not.
No.
And so we exchanged words in Chinese during that first meeting. And I was especially impressed that he was interested in spirituality and meditation. And I had begun meditating many, many years before that, when I was dealing with health crises with 2 types of cancer that were diagnosed in 2012. And when he expressed his interest in spirituality and meditation, I thought, wow, a politician who meditates.
Yeah.
And so he made me curious.
Did you meet him on the convention floor? Like, how did you actually meet him?
We met in a box that was for Governor Ed Rendell, who was like the king of the convention because he was the former beloved governor of Pennsylvania. And I happened to be there at the invitation of a friend, and I was perched on a stool writing notes in a notebook. And when he first came over to me, he said, "You're writing notes," as if that were unusual, because most people were on their cell phones or laptops writing. And so that was the way that he first approached me.
He approached you.
He did. We exchanged glances from just across an aisle, and then he came over to me.
I think I had met him once. I was on a panel at the Jewish community, JCAC, whatever it's called.
JCC?
The JCC on the Upper West Side, like a Buddhism panel. Maybe Sharon Salzberg was there. And I think Eric was there because Eric was, hanging around. He was interested in the Vipassana mindfulness world that I was also part of. And I had heard that he was interested. And so when you came to the office and told me you had met him, you know, and maybe there was a relationship brewing and so on, I was excited for you and happy for you. And I thought, oh, all these worlds are coming together, and Tanya, you know, like how great. And so, and it did seem good for a while, right?
It was good for a while. And also it took many weeks before the relationship got going. And that was largely because we were not in the same location. A few days after we met, we then had lunch in New York, and I was leaving for Portland, Oregon that night, and he was leaving for a retreat, for a meditation retreat, which also impressed me.
Yeah.
And we communicated kind of sparsely for a few weeks, but then as soon as we were back in the city, he then invited me to dinner. And he called me every night, and we would speak for an hour. And I remember that first time that I told you that there was a relationship beginning. I remember your excitement. And it also resonates with the excitement that so many people felt when he and I began seeing each other, because he was being worshipped as a progressive hero.
Yeah, yeah, that was right at the heart of all of that. Yeah.
It's what made it hard for me as the darkness started to seep in after the relationship was fully
Underway. Yeah.
fully underway. It's what made it hard for me to open up to people, because people worshipped him as a hero. And I also knew, as you and I have discussed privately, that if I put it out there, what his private behavior was like, I couldn't take it back.
Right.
And I was hopeful that he would change, that he would get help, because he acknowledged that he needed help.
Right.
And do you remember when I first started telling you about his drinking and the controlling behavior?
I do remember. At first it seemed like, oh, it's the pressure of fighting Trump. And he was in conversation with the other good attorney generals in Massachusetts and California. I remember you telling me who the good people were, and, you know, like that, the pressure, it seemed like the pressure was getting to him, and he was drinking, and you were worried about him, and you were trying to get help for him. I was totally there with that, and, you know, wanted to contribute what I could contribute from my side for the good of the world, you know. But tell the people who are, to tell people what you mean by the darkness, because they may not. Maybe people know, maybe they don't know, but they won't know what it was really like for you. So,
well, I should start by giving a trigger warning, because the details are difficult to talk about, and they are likely very difficult to listen to. But I walked the reader through the stages that I went through to get entangled in an abusive relationship. And it takes many forms. You know, people think of intimate violence as being physical violence. In my case, it was that. It was physical violence in the sexual context, the choking and slapping and spitting that emerged seemingly out of nowhere, never with my consent. And that happened often in the flash of an eye, and was jarring and shocking. But the violence also took the form of emotional and psychological abuse, of verbal abuse, of coercive control. His criticism of my hair, my weight, the way I dressed, his criticism of my scars, which I had spoken with you about. He wanted me to get plastic surgery to remove the scars on my torso. And when we first started the relationship, he would look at my scars as if they were a badge of courage. He would talk about my having overcome adversity and how much he admired that. But as the darkness started to seep in, the scars were ugly. And so those are the forms that I experienced, and there is much more. He would say on a number of occasions that if we broke up, he might have to kill me. And I had never been in an abusive relationship before. I had never had a man hit me before. I think I'm lucky that I had gotten up into my 40s without that having happened, because the reality is devastating, which is that 1 in 4 women and 1 in 10 men will experience some form of intimate partner violence in their lifetimes, and millions of them experience it before they turn 18.
Mhm. Yeah, talk about awakening for you, for this whole realm, this horrible realm that Eric became like a embodiment of. But, you know, as what I remember from being the therapist is, it wasn't like you came in and spilled right away that this is what was happening. You know, like there was a degree of privacy that, you know, his privacy and your privacy that you were holding. You know, I remember what a like crack in your presentation it was to begin to really talk about what actually you were experiencing, and the way that it came out of the blue. You alluded to that already when you were just going over the history of it, you know, that seemingly out of nowhere in the middle of intimate relations or whatever, this thing would happen. And yet there were these other signs, you know, of him never wanted to come to your apartment, I remember, and insisting on you wearing clothes that he had picked out, but not leaving stuff at his apartment, right? Wasn't that part of it? Like, he was very controlling about everything, right?
He was controlling about how much stuff I had in the apartment. He was confining me to smaller and smaller spaces within the apartment. That's part of the entrapment.
I know, the power and control thing is so real.
Yes.
Yeah.
And, you know, I would work in different parts of the apartment. He would criticize me for working at the dining room table, in the living room, as if I were an imposition and an inconvenience. And so I felt like I couldn't move without committing a transgression.
Yeah.
And also because he was talking about the added pressures on him after the election in 2016, he made it seem like his stress levels and depression were influenced by that. Of course, I would find out later that in fact, he had been behaving that way towards his intimate partners for many decades.
Yeah. But that was a big revelation, you know, because, right? Because it seemed, when you're in the middle of it, it seems like, oh, it's just us, it's just now, it's just it's just Donald Trump, it's just, you know, the circumstance, it's just the pressure. And so was he apologetic? Like, what was the dynamic between you around this? Like, I mean, tell me.
It depended on the time of day. It depended on his mood. It depended on what he was dealing with in his work life. And it also depended on his alcohol consumption levels.
Mm-hmm.
So there were times when he acknowledged that he needed help and he was going to go away and get it.
Mm-hmm. He would say that to you?
Yes.
Yeah.
When I would describe to him his actions, there were times when the physical violence happened in the sexual context, where I would say, stop, and I would say, that hurts, and I would jump out of bed.
Mm-hmm.
I would go to the next room. But he couldn't control himself. He did his best to control me.
Yeah, good point.
And he kept, abusers are very skilled at tapping into their victims' weaknesses and manipulating them and breaking the victim down.
Yeah.
I never, ever thought that I would become a victim.
I know, I never thought that of you either. Yeah.
Right.
What weakness of yours was he tapping into?
I had come off of a string of disappointments in my romantic life and with regard to my health. I had had a series of miscarriages, 3. I had fertility treatments that I had to stop when 2 cancerous tumors were discovered. And it was shortly after the surgery for those tumors in 2012 that my husband at the time announced that he wanted to separate. And I was grieving in many ways for a few years after that. And the divorce was finalized in the fall of 2014.
Mm.
And then I met Eric Schneiderman less than 2 years later. So even though I was very strong and accomplished in my work and in a loving community of friends and colleagues, when it came to romance, I was weakened. And I don't know if he had a kind of telepathic sense for that, but abusers seem to be very skilled at identifying their prey.
Mhm.
And they do it by testing the waters.
Mhm.
So that's why I think it took a while before the abusive behavior seeped in.
Right,
He broke me down,
right,
drip
right,
by drip.
right. Well, you excused it at first, right? Wasn't that like sort of the psychological defense against what's happening is to be like, oh, did that really, that was just a one-off sort of thing.
Yes.
Yeah.
And what I discovered from having heard from other previous girlfriends
Yeah.
is that he did eerily similar
Yeah. Yeah.
tactics of breaking them down.
Yeah. Yeah. This was
And they are very accomplished women.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I just wish that they had come forward before me.
You were the only one. Come on, Tanya. That was like, and a lot of people that I know and that you know were, including me, were encouraging you to keep it quiet, right? Not to bring it, not to make it public.
Well, I felt like you were not encouraging me not to make it public, but I think you were more concerned about the impact it might have on my life to
Totally
go public.
Yeah.
But there were some people who were discouraging me from going public because they felt that we needed him to be a bulwark against the former president.
Yeah.
And that's myopic thinking. It's, loyalty over conscience.
Mm-hmm.
Because, and it's also that myth of indispensability,
Mm-hmm.
that the powerful good guy is indispensable.
Yeah.
That we put on pedestals when really there are plenty of talented people who can take their place, who don't beat women up privately.
Yeah.
And that was proven in my case. He was replaced by Attorney General Letitia James.
Yeah.
Thank Goddess.
Yeah. So what about the spiritual thing in him? What do you make of his being drawn to Buddhism and meditation and all of that?
I have both an empathetic perspective on it and also a cynical perspective on it. Mm-hmm. The empathetic perspective is that he genuinely wanted to heal himself, to become a better person, to tap into the good parts of himself. Mm-hmm. The cynical part of me feels that it was a form of deflection, that by being outwardly facing a spiritual guy and one who was an advocate for women's rights, for immigrants' rights, for LGBTQ rights, that he could get away with his private behaviors. Yeah. Yeah. So I feel that there are people who have both, I'm not religious, but if I were to put it in religious terms, I feel that there are people who have an angel and a devil guiding them. Yeah. And he strikes me as somebody like that, as so many powerful public figures are, bifurcated individuals. I'll say something else about that if you let me go there.
Go ahead.
The causes that he supported, spirituality and feminism in particular, he found many enablers that were cover for him. Some of them must have known about his behavior because they had been around when the previous girlfriends had been around. And they can't be particularly perceptive people, even though they're spiritual teachers, if they didn't notice that there was something up. And I don't think that they actually liked him. I think that they liked his power. He was their conduit to power. I mean, you mentioned Sharon Salzberg, Ethan Nichtern. Like I don't know what I would do if I encountered them.
Mm-hmm. he never, the statements that he put out after the big New Yorker article and so on, he resigned immediately. But the only statements that I remember seeing, were like, that was consensual. I'm into S&M a little bit, and that's all. Do you think he? I mean, the topic is awareness, right? That we're with the Reuben umbrella that we're under. Do you think he was aware of what he was enacting, of what he was perpetrating on you and the other women that he, like, how conscious do you believe he could be?
He definitely was.
He definitely was. Mm-hmm.
I believe I shared with you the emails that he would send me in those months that after we parted ways.
Mm-hmm.
So this was in the fall of 2017. We parted ways shortly before the Harvey Weinstein story broke.
Mm-hmm.
And around that time, he reached out to me saying, I want to continue to support your good work.
Mm-hmm.
These are not normal times.
Mm-hmm.
He was gauging my temperature.
Mm-hmm.
A few months later, when he invited me to go to the Grammys with him, saying he
Mm-hmm.
couldn't imagine taking somebody else.
Really?
And I thought, does he think that I'm that gullible,
Mm-hmm.
that I'm that starstruck, that I would want to go with him to the Grammys? But it also gave me reassurance that he wasn't with somebody else, that he
Mm-hmm.
wasn't beating somebody else up, and that he had no idea what I was thinking. Because
Mm-hmm.
at that point, I had already begun speaking with David Remnick of The New Yorker.
Mm-hmm.
And then there were more times in the weeks leading up to the New Yorker story landing that he reached out to me as well, insisting that we had to talk,
Mm-hmm.
and getting increasingly agitated when I wouldn't respond. So I knew that he knew he had been bad.
Mm-hmm.
I also know from having had conversations or email exchanges with previous girlfriends that he knew that he was bad.
Mm-hmm.
And he had tried to intimidate them.
Mm-hmm.
And I had two reach out to me since the book came out, one who was abused by him 4 decades ago, and another one that was abused by him 14 years ago. And both expressed a kind of fear of him still. And I don't, I sympathize with that fear, but I also feel, and I feel bad saying this, that it's irrational fear. Because I believe that there's good fear and bad fear, as Gavin de Becker writes about in The Gift of Fear. And although I was fearful about coming forward, I focused on being guided by good fear. So
Yeah.
taking the steps to protect myself so that I could live my best life afterwards. Also, I knew that news cycles pass, attention spans are short, and that people would ultimately move on. And that happened. It's been in the news again lately, not just because of my book, but also because it was announced that he has, in fact, agreed to discipline by consent, has forfeited his law license, and has admitted to the abuse.
Really? Oh, I didn't know this.
You didn't know? It was just in the news last week.
No, I didn't know this. Really? Really?
And that's a huge step. So
Yeah.
it went from him trying to argue that he engaged in these behaviors in consensual relationships in 2018 when the New Yorker story came out, to now 3 years later making a statement that he acknowledged the harm. He acknowledged the misconduct and has to undergo monitored mental health counseling for a year.
For a year. Okay, well, that's something.
It's something. It's, a year forfeiture of his law license and a year of mental health counseling are not going to outroot the kind of behavior that he exhibited over decades and decades and decades. But it's a step.
It's a step.
And it's also a sign that private.
You were so brave, Tanya. You were so brave too. You were, I remember. Will you talk a little bit about what it was like to get out of the relationship? That was not an easy thing.
I knew I had to get out of the relationship when I started opening up to people about exactly what was happening.
Yeah.
And do you remember the conversation that you and I had when I went from having told you about the controlling behavior, the criticism, you encouraged me to spend more and more time away from him, to spend more nights at my apartment downtown. Things were getting incredibly rocky with him. He was treating me like a yo-yo, kind of, you know, pushing me away and then pulling me back and wanting me to be at his beck and call. And then I opened up to you about the physical violence, and you told me, run.
Yeah.
Do you remember that?
I remember that. Yeah, thank goodness.
And I asked you what you thought, and you
Yeah.
said, he's a pig.
I remember that. Yeah.
And you were so disappointed because you were excited for me when the relationship first began.
Yeah.
And there was another friend around that time who asked me, after asking me a lot of other questions about what had been going on in the relationship, and she asked a very simple question, but a hard one: does he hit you? And I said, yes. And then she, knowing that she did not have the skills to take me from that point forward, connected me with a good friend of hers who's a domestic violence expert, who then helped me craft a safety plan
Yeah.
for how to get out.
Yeah.
And that is a very important.
Talk about that a little bit. What was the safety plan?
Well, we explored many avenues for getting out of the relationship and also for protecting myself after I got out of the relationship. The most dangerous time for a woman to leave, for a woman, is when she's leaving the abusive relationship, because you can't anticipate how your abuser might snap.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, the majority of fatalities in domestic violence situations happen when the woman is leaving.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
When she's just getting out.
Outside of the control.
And so I just had no idea what might happen in this situation. And I also wasn't aware of what had happened in the previous situations, because I still didn't know if there were other victims before me. I still thought the abuse was specific to me. But the domestic violence expert made it clear that I was definitely not the first.
Yeah, I remember processing that, and what a leap, you know, what a leap that is to what a leap it was, and it turned out to be so true. So just say a little more about what the how you extricated yourself, because I remember, you know, when you went up to the apartment to get your stuff and all, but that was all scary.
Well, in going to the apartment to get my stuff, I didn't do until quite a long time after we had parted ways. And getting to that point where we parted ways, she just told me to avoid him, to drift, not to poke the bear, not to let him know what I'm thinking. For me, there was no looking back. I was not going to go back to the relationship. There were previous girlfriends of his who did kind of try to get back together with him. And but the scales fell off my eyes. When I had that conversation with my friend, that conversation with you, and the conversation with the domestic violence expert. And it was like I was reclaiming myself and my voice again, that he had so broken down. And so I did, I just avoided him. And this went on for a relatively short amount of time, a few weeks. And then he wanted to speak with me. And I then prepared with the domestic violence expert for how that conversation might go. We prepared various scripts depending on what he wanted to say. And she told me to make sure that I have an exit plan out of the exit call. So to make sure that I didn't stay on longer than I needed to, and that I had plans with a friend for right afterwards so I wouldn't be alone. And she said the ideal scenario would be that he's gotten the hint and he's going to break up with you, which is what I wanted. And also, as I mentioned, the relationship had started being a total roller coaster and very rocky and a yo-yo. But because I was avoiding him, it it was very clear where things were heading. And so we broke up by phone.
So you actually had that conversation with him?
We had that conversation. It was very, very short.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And he said, he started it by saying, "It seems like you've been avoiding me." And I said, "Yes, I just need time."
Mm-hmm.
And he said, "Well, maybe we should go our separate ways." And I said, "I think that would be for the best." And he said, "Really?" And then I was like, for me, that was all that I needed to convey. And he tried to make some light conversation, and I was still in a very vulnerable headspace,
Mm-hmm.
but I knew what I had to do.
Yeah.
And then I spoke with the domestic violence expert after that call. And then she said, "Now your unbrainwashing can begin."
Uh-huh. Wow.
And it was with you and with her, and with the support of my friends and also my work.
Writing the book, right?
Well, I say thank goodness that I'm a writer. I also feel like he messed with the wrong person when he messed with a writer. I'm a storyteller. I'm a documentary filmmaker.
Yeah.
I was keeping notes.
Yeah.
And you remember, I even had recordings of him.
Yeah, I do remember.
Because we were talking about him writing a memoir.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would interview him about his life.
Yeah.
And he would tell me about the great animus between his parents and also the animus between him and his mother.
Mm-hmm.
So I had a window into the psychology of where this abusive behavior might have sprung from.
Yeah.
That's no excuse for it, though.
Yeah. Yeah. So we're going to take some questions, Tanya, but just before we do that, you wrote such a beautiful epilogue to the book, in which you talked about, getting more of the information about the past relationships, like all the women. Some of, there's more than two. There's a bunch of them who have come forward, at least privately, to you.
There's 10 total that I'm aware of.
You're aware of 10. I mean, what's your feeling about that?
I wish that somebody had warned me about him so that I didn't have these memories.
Yeah.
But I have to accept that nobody did.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like I did the right thing. And I'm grateful that I had to work. I'm grateful for my friends. People talk about compartmentalizing. Like, you look at the Tina Turner documentary and how she was beaten up by Ike Turner at home, and then she would go on and perform with such ferocity, like ferociousness, and she was just so on fire. And it's not compartmentalizing. I call it professionalism.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, I had to show up to work. I had to make a living. So I'm very grateful for all that. And so that helps me move past the disappointment I feel about the many women, not just the victims, but the people around Eric who knew about his abusive behavior, who could have warned me.
Yeah.
Maybe some of them thought that he would be different with me because of who I am, that I've been throughout my career an advocate for the rights and safety of women and children. But those patterns don't stop unless you force them to stop.
Yeah.
And that's what's happening now.
Yeah. I think
forfeiture of his law license.
That's the great lesson of this. So.
And I'm so glad you talk about the epilogue, because that came after I had completely finished the manuscript.
Well.
But I felt like I had to add a new chapter, because after I finished the manuscript, there was so much magic that was coming into my life. There was so much, the book is on a dark subject, but it's full of magic and healing and light and art.
Yeah.
And the two women that reached out to me after the New Yorker story came out, the investigation by Ronan Farrow and Jane Mayer, who wanted to share their experiences of being abused by him, the bird that appeared on my deck and built a nest as I was finishing the book. and just what was happening during the pandemic last year,
Yeah.
with the inward turning that so many of us had
Yeah.
to do because we were so solitary. You know, I was very solitary for much of the pandemic last year, and I finished the book when I was in Portland, Oregon last year. So it was against the backdrop of the pandemic, the uprisings against systemic racism, and I just felt like that had to be a part of the book because it was so crucial to my trajectory and how I was able to find my light. You know, and I end the book with the words, "Let's split the world open together." And that's kind of the call to action.
Yeah.
And the book also has a lot of resources for people to find help for themselves and also for their loved ones.
Well, I'm really glad the energy turned around for you. Like, you put this thing out there and got so much affirmation in return. So, Tim, we're going to invite you in to ask some questions.
I've been very much in listening to this exchange, which has both a beauty in it, but also a wonderful, clear compassion and engagement. And I'm just delighted that you thought that this would be a great place to share this experience in this way.
I didn't get to say how much I love the Reuben. The work that you've been doing, Tim, all these years. I'm so glad to be part of it.
It's very much a collaborative effort, let me tell you, and that's the point. You know, you become part of a community, and Tanya, you fostered that community of women who feel now that they're empowered to speak out and identify and stand together, and this is incredibly important. Incredibly important.
Thank you so much, Tim.
So you actually, at the last part of your conversation, answered the very first question, which was, can you speak on the personal therapeutic value of writing this book? And you've drawn upon that positivity that you found while distilling the essence of the experience for others to be able to register it strongly and viscerally through writing. But Mark, you say you love the Reuben, and I'm really glad you do. It makes us partners in many fields, which is really great. But I have a Reuben question for you both, which is, I don't recall in the sutras that there are experiences related of how the Buddha deals with abusive relationships. So what were you able to draw from the Buddhist teachings for Tanya's benefit in this whole process? Were there any specifics that you recall that you could maybe relate to?
Oh, yeah, no, I can talk about that. And it pertains to the question about the writing, I think, because if there was ever a traumatic experience, what Tanya went through with Eric Schneiderman meets all the definitions of trauma, okay? So she was definitely traumatized and had to work against the tendency to dissociate that comes with trauma, you know, the experiences or the feelings being too intense for the ego to bear. So the feelings have to be shut away somewhere. The whole experience has to be compartmentalized, as Tanya, as you were talking about before. So the writing, I think most of the therapy came out of the writing of the book and the work that Tanya did with the domestic violence counselors who really understood. But what I've learned from Buddhism is that we all have the inner resources to actually deal with trauma, that trauma is ever present and underlying all of our experiences, maybe not to the intense sexual erotic degree that Tanya had to deal with. But the Buddha himself was a victim of trauma. His mother died when he was just a week old. And a lot of my writing about trauma from a Buddhist place is suggesting that the Buddha actually, his whole search in the forest for enlightenment was in some way trying to deal with the traumatic impact of that early loss that he had to. And I think it's a stand-in a way for the way that many of us growing up feel some kind of absence, you know, something missing in our relationship, even with our parents who didn't die, or something missing inside ourselves that we're searching for. So meditation and I think therapy create what sometimes is called a relational home, a safe place, which I think of as the Reuben is also a safe place where people can come to experience that which is otherwise too difficult to experience. So I think if I did anything helpful for Tanya during this time, it was to maintain a reliable presence for her where she could come slowly on her own, of her own free will, to admit, to come to terms with, to actually become aware of what was going on in her personal life. And just that, the safety of the relationship gave her some energy that she has used in all the ways that we've been talking about, to write the book, to find the resources, to put all this energy out into the world to help other people. So it's a
Can I
long
add to that?
answer. Yeah, please, Tanya.
Well, I would say you did many things to help me through that time. In addition to helping me increase the awareness of what I had experienced and the trauma that I was going through. I mean, as you know, there were very, very, very dark times after I was out of the relationship. And there were very, very dark times as I was writing the book and reliving what I had experienced in the relationship. And we didn't even touch upon this. We didn't have enough time, but I was in a very, very dark place. But then it was through the kind of catharsis and exorcism of feeling the pain, reliving it, and then finding my light that I was able to emerge stronger than I was before I was in the relationship even.
Yeah.
Like I became my strongest self ever, and you helped a lot with that. You also were very helpful in that you were a safe space where I could talk about the day-to-day of what I was dealing with in coming forward, because I couldn't talk to anybody else about it. And because we had, patient therapist privilege, because I had given my word to David Remnick that I would not talk to anybody.
Yeah.
But I felt that you were somebody I could talk to.
Yeah. Well, that's the privilege of being the therapist.
You get to hear about things before they hit the news.
Exactly. That's one of my great thrills.
Well, yeah, and privilege is a really important word to just take for a minute, because we do have a question here about, what advice do you have for women who are too scared to come forward because of vengeful behavior by an abuser in particular? What about women who do not have the means and networks that, Tanya, you managed to have or build to escape violence? So maybe, Tanya, you have some advice here.
It was very important for me to write a book that would draw the reader in through the narrative, through the psychological thriller, so that I could then give the reader resources to spot, stop, and prevent intimate partner violence in their own lives. So in the appendix, there's a checklist of the different forms of domestic violence and also their effects. And also there is a list of dozens of organizations that serve different and specific communities that people can reach out to for help. It's not so much about coming forward, but on focusing on one's personal safety and how to get out of an abusive relationship safely. I recognize that I was in a fortunate position, fortunate is a loaded word, but fortunate position that I did have friends who connected me with resources, who connected me with a domestic violence expert, who connected me with a lawyer, who then helped me navigate the maelstrom of coming forward. And I wanted to be able to provide people with organizations that they could turn to for help, because there are organizations that can help and that can provide a safety plan. But I think that there's so much work that needs to be done. And the pandemic has exposed the fractures in our systems that perpetuate the cycle of violence, that perpetuate misogyny and abuse. And I feel like we have an opportunity now, because there's a heightened awareness of domestic violence increases around the world during lockdown. And so it's about increasing education and public awareness, which I hope that my book helps with. It's also about increasing political will and government resources for these organizations that serve specific communities.
Yeah, so thank you, because you've again anticipated a question that's already in the Q&A, which is, you know, are there lessons that informed you going forward that you can share? And that's what the book does, right? But the other part of that question is, while you seem to have handled this so well, do you have any regrets, any signs you think you missed?
I regret getting into the relationship.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
But I also feel that the universe intended for me to encounter Eric Schneiderman and to end a pattern of violence that he had been engaging in for a very long time. Because if I weren't going to come forward, I don't know who would have. So I was very aware of that. And it didn't feel like a burden. I just knew what I had to do, you know, because it was going to be a lose-lose situation. Like either I really had no intention of coming forward when I first got out of the relationship, because I didn't know that I was part of a pattern. I was going to just say, you know, it was about a year of my life. I've dealt with difficult times before. I've dealt with cancer. I've dealt with mortality. I've dealt with miscarriages. I've dealt with, you know, and what I've dealt with is like a fraction of what so many people around the world deal with. You know, I come from Sri Lanka, where people have endured decades of civil war, have endured tsunamis. So for me, I say that, you know, I feel fortunate in many ways that I can keep moving, that I have friends who keep me looking up. But I knew that if I didn't come forward after finding out that I was part of a pattern, about a month after I got out of the relationship, I felt the story coming out would be inevitable and that I had to prevent him from harming another woman, because I didn't want another woman to have the memories that I did. And I didn't want that on my conscience. I couldn't have it on my conscience. It would have been completely antagonistic to who I am, to my.
Well, I remember from the therapy sessions when you were coming to that decision. And I remember my own ambivalence about your coming forward or keeping, you know, that's what turned me, that seemed sincere in you, you know, that was a real motivation. So I salute you for that. I have a question. In all the research that you did, Tanya, about the, you know, the help that's out there, what kind of help is out there for the perpetrator, you know, for the people who find themselves acting this way?
I'm so glad you asked that question, and it is included in the book as well.
Yeah.
I believe in redemption. I believe that abusive behavior can be outrooted, but it takes very, very hard work, even harder than it is for the victim to kind of unearth and recover from the trauma. It is very hard for an abuser to stop being abusive. But there are incredible programs out there, and those programs need to start in grade school, because that's where the behaviors become ingrained. The bullying, the teasing, the gender dynamics, you know, that women are weak and men have to power over them. So those are narratives that we have to subvert. And there are programs like Call to Men, and there are some for high schools and colleges. And also there are some jurisdictions that mandate anti-violence programs for perpetrators. The problem is that it's very hard to get the perpetrators to stay in those programs. Yeah. So some jurisdictions have issued penalties for perpetrators who don't show up. And I think that's necessary. I think that there do need to be punitive measures, because people have to be forced to do the right thing sometimes.
Okay, that's helpful.
I want to just apologize in advance for all of you who have questions that we won't get time to answer in full, but that is what Tanya's book is for. Assume Nothing, a story of intimate violence, and you can get it through her website. So we'll post that again, that link. But there is one question we can attend to before we have a short meditation to conclude the session. And Tanya, at the beginning of the conversation, you used the word trigger, right? And Mark, you used that word too, trauma of everyday life, things that perpetuate or reactivate a traumatic memory. And so, Tanya, this is perhaps for you, but Mark would like your advice. How do you handle sort of seemingly normal conversations, and then something will come up which then takes you back, right, to the abuse? And how do you navigate that? And what is the resilience that you have managed to build up to manage those sort of responses?
Recognizing, it's hard to recognize a trigger in the moment, but it becomes easier to identify the reaction to the trigger. And this is something that Mark knows very well about me, is that I would have experiences where I would feel mocked or trapped or demeaned after I had gotten out of the relationship. And in particular, in a workplace situation where I was experiencing truly disturbing belittling by a coworker, and I would start shaking. And Mark, I'm sure you remember me talking about this. And so it was like me kind of being able to identify my reaction to the trigger and then being able to calm myself. And I had to rely on Mark for techniques to deal with those triggers. I still have triggers today, but as I said, by writing the book and now having it out there in the world, I feel like I have released a lot of the trauma. It comes and goes in waves. When I hear from people sharing their stories of intimate violence, which has been happening a lot since the book came out, I have to breathe. But meditation helps me a lot. Mark knows this, but it's hard for me to find meditations that work for me because there's so much imitation in the meditation community. But being able to note what I'm experiencing, being able to accept it, and being able to control my breath and focus on my breathing to help me recover from the trigger.
Just to say one other thing about that, Tanya, in the workplace belittling that you're referring to, what I remember, one of the important things was that you remember the power of your words, which you found in writing the book, but also that the tendency to keep it all private and just vibrate and, with the feeling versus going to, the person that you trusted in the work environment and confiding to them about what's happening so that, your own agency, your own ability to put words on the experience and describe it for another so that you're not just on the receiving end of something that doesn't make sense. For me, from the therapeutic point of view, that's what I was always encouraging.
Yes.
And it worked.
It did work. It did work.
It worked.
And also I'm an intrepid journaler, because I was a shy child and an introvert. I took notes the entire time. I document so much of my lived experience. And it's a way of working things out for me.
It's interesting that's what attracted Eric to you in the first place. So in a way, he was pulled to his own his own
undoing.
Hard, but he needed that. He needed to be unmasked. He needed that. So
well, yes,
may he be free.
May he be free. And it's not about him. It's not about an individual. It's about a whole system that is designed to power over people.
Yeah.
And that's what we need to focus on. It's like, what are the systemic roots of this violent and abusive system? Yeah. And it goes back centuries.
Yeah, definitely.
And it's been exposed now. And I'm really grateful. I should mention that the book is being turned into a series.
This is public now?
The fact that it's been optioned by ABC Signature Disney Television is public. I was not seeking for it to be turned into a series. An executive producer, Joanna Coles, approached me because she wanted to read the book and then really feels that the message should be spread far and wide. So I'm very grateful for that, because I wrote the book so that it could help others, in addition to writing my way out of the darkness. So I'm glad that it will have a bigger platform, because the more that we tell our truths, the more that we can chip away at that cycle of violence. And also, one can't anticipate whose life you might save or safety you might protect by sharing your truth. So it's not just my story that's in the book, it's the story of so many, with the research that I did. And so I'm grateful for that. Who's going to play you, Mark?
That's my question.
I have an idea.
We will see. All right, Tim.
Before we get into that sort of that Hollywood,
let's end on that note. Yeah.
It just seems to me that Tanya, your last statement, other than the one about casting for Mark, was spot on in terms of what the essence of the Buddhist teaching practice is, which is an act of selflessness, right? So you are doing this, yes, of course, you are helping yourself work your way through this trauma and experience, but your ultimate goal is to be of service to others through your own trauma. And that is an incredibly brave and selfless thing to do, and we really applaud you for it. So thank you for doing that for us, because some of us in this audience may well be male and hopefully not abusers, but as you say, it's a systemic issue. And so we are all bound by your experience, and we are all party to it in some way or another. And so we're happy about the news that it'll get a wider audience through a series. So congratulations.
Thank you. And thank you, Tim. It's been a dream of mine to be part of the Brainwave series.
I know, and we finally made it happen.
We finally made it happen.
It was supposed to have happened last year, and the COVID got in the way, but then you also returned to your book and
I wrote a new chapter
that were really valuable to you and to others. So you also mentioned, I think, a very important part about the sort of safety in the community, in a place where you could feel you could unburden yourself. And I'm going to unburden myself right now, if I may, by thanking the support system that we at the Reuben have from those very important bodies and institutions that feel that we do good work too. And so the lead support for Brainwave is provided by Science Sandbox, which is an initiative of the Simon Foundation. This is the second year that they're supporting us in this way, in a very generous way. And of course, also by the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs in partnership with the City Council, and many, many individuals, and you who turn up to engage with us in this forum. So thank you for joining us tonight. So Mark, we've been talking about systemic, and the system that we need to maybe give the greatest awareness to right now is our body and the use of breath and meditation, and maybe for a few minutes to conclude, you might guide us in this way. That would really be beautiful. And folks, I just want you to know that will be the last thing that you will receive from us at the Reuben, in the form of Dr. Epstein's meditation. We'll let you go out into the world with that with no further ado. So I want to thank you, Tanya, for really initiating this conversation and bringing it to us to share on the platform of Brainwave at the Rubin Museum. Thank you so much. And thank you, Mark, for guiding.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Tanya. This was fun. Thank you, everybody. So let me we'll do a couple of minute meditation. You can all continue sitting wherever you are, looking at the computer screen. But if you want to go inside, let your eyes get dim, close, or look down, or look at me if you would rather. But take your attention inside and just feel your body resting, hopefully comfortably, on the chair, on the couch, on the cushion, Allow your body just to relax as much as it can into this moment, into itself. Bring your attention down, down, down into your physical form, feeling the breath as it comes and goes. And then, and this is the real meditation part, let your mind rest in your body, the way your body rests on the cushion in the chair, on the floor. Let the mind, like water poured through coffee grounds, let the mind settle into the body and feel inside, you know, that feeling when you were 14 or when you were 20, when you were 30, whatever age you are, the feeling inside, that's the same, where you know you're you, even if your outward form has changed, circumstances change, time runs on, but inside there's some transparent feeling where that's still you. Let your mind rest in that place of you-ness that is at once very particular to you, but also kind of transparent. And just breathe in that space for a moment or two. Let whatever thoughts or feelings triggered by our conversation, let them settle. And just feel your aliveness. And whatever gratitude might be there for this moment that we all share. Thank you all.